this week, 1 billion Muslims worldwide will begin to observe the month of Ramadan, in which spiritual reawakening is the goal. One Muslim making very big waves on a global level is Zain Bhikha. Zain is one of the top Islamic song artists in the world and #1 in South Africa. He now joins me for this edition of On the Couch. Zain, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
As I mentioned, 1 billion Muslims worldwide will be observing the month of Ramadan. Of course, you are one of many. Fasting is a very important element in many religions and, of course, very entrenched in Islam. Tell us about the month of Ramadan and how that's shaped you in many senses.
Well, I think, you've raised a very important thing that it's not just for Muslims or people of the Islamic faith. I think fasting is mandatory in many religions, and I think it's a great time for contemplation. It's a great time for people just to sit back and really almost count the blessings, because many of us are fortunate enough to have 3 meals a day without ever thinking about those people who probably don't have the blessing of just food available or drink available. So I think it's really a time for, most importantly, to get closer to God and to think about the blessings we have in this life. And it's a wonderful month. I think before it comes, I think most Muslims are a little apprehensive about managing the day without eating any food or drink throughout sort of the hours of daylight, because we start fasting just before sunrise and we break our fast in the evening just at sunset. So we're a little apprehensive, but once Ramadan starts, it actually becomes quite easy, and I think everyone gets into this focus of God consciousness, and that's the purpose, really.
Yeah, well, speaking of God consciousness and being very lucky in many instances, you have been quite lucky. You've had made amazing headway within the South African space as an artist. Tell us what kind of artist you are. You're an Islamic artist, if we're not mistaken, but you sing in English.
Yeah, I think
and
when
pioneering
I started,
this space.
Absolutely. I think when I started in 1994, there wasn't any songs in English about Islam. Most of the songs were, in Arabic or in Urdu or in language, and obviously English is the language that I speak. And as a sort of a young, amateur artist, I released a small tape in 1994, and it wasn't really very well produced. But I think the concept of having songs in English that the children could understand about the Islamic faith, about, for example, praising God or praising the prophets, or a simple song like the Eid song, what we do on the festivals of Eid. I think people were quite intrigued, and really that's the beginning. And because, as you rightly said, there wasn't anything like that at the time, I think it grew amazingly well, and I'm very blessed that the songs have traveled so well.
Okay, so you're #1 in South Africa, but tell us who your audience is on a global level. 1 billion Muslims, what is your market share there?
Well, I'm not sure in terms of exact numbers, but I think in English-speaking Western countries, especially if you go to the UK or United States, even parts of Europe, I've been to Holland and Belgium, Turkey. I mean, I think Muslims living in the West can really associate with my type of music, my type of songs. A lot of it is relating to a lot of social issues, besides obviously songs about praising God and praising the prophets. But we also have songs like about mothers, about appreciating your parents, about orphans. So I've been quite blessed. I've been recently to Malaysia, Indonesia, India, in terms of the Far East, and it's amazing. I think today with technology that music becomes such a tool that can spread quite quickly because of Facebook and MySpace and Twitter, and people can have access to music quite easily.
I assume that you sit on Facebook and Twitter quite often.
Well, I try not to myself. I've got a team of people who manage it for me, so that does help me a little, because I don't do this full time. I've got a full time job which I work with my dad, and I've got a family as well. So it's a little difficult.
So what is this full time job?
Well, my dad actually he's always been involved in the healthcare space. So he's a pharmacist. He started a big pharmaceutical company, and then he got involved in natural medicine. He's now a professor in Unani Tib medicine, which is one of the modalities you can compare to like homeopathy or Chinese Ayurveda. So I'm involved with him. We market a range of products in the country, and my dad's very much involved in charity as well. So that's really my full-time job, and the music is just a hobby which allows me my creative outlet, you know.
That's quite fascinating. I mean, most artists, most successful artists say that you can't really have a full-time job and it can't really be your part-time job to be an artist. So how do you maintain your success within your artistic space and also be involved in the corporate arena?
I think it's difficult because, you know, balancing the time. But I think for me, it allows me to go to work every day, and which is obviously very, very structured and very, you know, debits and credits in black and white, and you know, the business world is very much like that. Whereas, you know, in my spare time, in the evenings or on the weekends, I would focus on my music, which is, you know, you have to be open to all types of influences, any type of inspiration. And I think it gives me a great balance. And I love the fact that I'm not doing it full time, so I don't always have to make commercial decisions, and I can make rather decisions on my music that are applicable to me as a person. So.
Okay, so can I delve into the monetary aspect when it comes to music? I mean, are you actually benefiting? Are you profiting from your music at this point in time? And I mean, are you selling albums? I know that you're very involved in sort of charity and things like that. Do you view your music in that sense, that it is more about charity and education as opposed to a profit-making element in your life?
Absolutely. You know, most people don't realize this, but all my music is owned by a charity here in South Africa that my dad set up maybe about 7 or 8 years ago. So when it comes to the sale of the CDs or a show or anything that's related to my music, all the proceeds goes towards charity. I'm very fortunate. I know many talented artists who don't have this opportunity because they're relying on the music to sort of pay the bills. But I have a full-time job, and that kind of keeps me going. And the music allows me to give back to the community. I also do a lot of workshops. So everything I do in my creative space allows me to give back to the community. And, you know, with the funds that we get from my music as well as from donations, we focus on primary healthcare clinics in South Africa. We've put up 2 in Cape Town so far. And we hope to spread these clinics to various other parts of the country.
With regards to then Africa, I mean, you're obviously doing fantastic work here in South Africa. You're very well known as an artist here. We also have a very big Muslim community on the rest of the continent. What headway have you made with regards to that, if any at all?
Well, I was actually very surprised. I didn't expect that my music. Obviously, my initial markets when I started were very much, the US, the Canada, the UK. But over the last 3 or 4 years, I must say, I've been getting a lot more interest from Africa. Last year, I did a tour of Ghana and Ivory Coast. And, it was during the Eid festival in Ivory Coast. I didn't even realize there were so many Muslims in Ivory Coast. But we had a sold-out concert of about 5,500 people. And they all knew my songs, even though, most people speak French in Ivory Coast. They don't speak English. But they all knew the words of my songs. And I was quite amazed, actually, that... in various parts of the African continent, especially with Islamic radio stations coming up, and there's a lot of more people having access to the media, my songs are traveling well. And I just really wish that as a South African artist, I could do more in Africa, because I think I owe it to this continent, to this country. It's a place where I grew up.
You're saying you wish you could. Why can't you? I mean, what is stopping you? Is it the fact that you are tied in with a very important business? I mean, you're talking about the family business that you're involved in, or is it perhaps a lack of resources, or perhaps a lack of arrangements and organizing things, because Africa is big, 53 countries, and
I think it's a combination of all that you mentioned. I think it's one, obviously, lack of time from my side, but I think that I need to prioritize. But in terms of sometimes just purely economics, to bring myself and the band, which I normally travel with backing vocalists and a drummer, to bring us to a country, it's obviously costly. So it's about working with the right organizations. And like in Ivory Coast, if there's a festival where they have a lot of sponsors, then, people are able to afford to bring us all over to the country. So in that respect, I'm hoping that as the popularity of the songs grows, over the next, hopefully, few years, I'm able to do a lot more shows within Africa.
Okay, so now that you are perhaps a pioneer in your space, and we know that you've worked very closely with Yusuf Islam, who's actually Cat Stevens, and we know that Cat Stevens has, of course, also been a very important element in terms of music for many decades. Have you found that more young artists, Islamic artists, are coming to the fore and going the English route and doing offering new products to the youth at this point in time?
Absolutely. I think over the last 5 years especially, I've seen a proliferation of Islamic artists, even from the Middle East, where traditionally the Middle East artists were focused entirely on Arabic. I've seen you've got the likes of Sami Yusuf, and there's another artist from Sweden, Zain, who's done a lot of songs in English and popularized this genre, especially amongst younger audiences. So I'm very proud to have been a part of that. And I think if I look back at my beginning, I released many independent albums, and then it was really in 1999 when Yusuf Islam, the famous pop star from the 60s and 70s, as Cat Stevens, he came across one of these tapes and invited me to London to record an album that he was recording at the time called Ace for Allah, it was more an educational project, and he wanted me to sing some of the songs. And I'm very fortunate. I think Yusuf gave me the exposure for my songs to get abroad, because through his name and his reputation, a lot more people were able to gain access to my music. And till today, he remains a great mentor. He's based in Dubai now, and he gives me great advice about the direction of my music. And I'm very, very, very lucky to have had this association with him.
Okay, we also know that you've started the Zain Bhikha studios as well. One thing that does fascinate me when it comes to the music industry is production companies, production houses, of course the likes of EMI and all the big record labels that we hear. We know that there are certain flaws within this space. You're talking about being independent and recording independently. Tell us about the process from recording your first song to where you are today and some of the challenges that you've experienced.
I think the biggest hurdle that we faced is in the Islamic space of music, there is a big difference of opinion among scholars about the use of musical instruments. So when I started, we were singing primarily just with voices and no instruments. And as you know, that can be quite challenging in an artistic space to try to make the song still appealing. Subsequently to that, maybe around about my fourth album, we started introducing drums, like natural percussion, like the djembe or the congas, bongos, those type of things. But even till today, my songs are only voices and drums. And we try to layer the voices to try to make it as big as possible without the use of instrumentation, to try to maintain, for it to be appealing to young people especially. And I must say that that's quite a long process. So, a song might take maybe 3 times longer than recording a conventional song, because of we need to technically replace all the instrumentation we're hearing with voices, so that still try to make it appealing to the listener. So I because of this process, I tend not to release albums as quickly as often as I would like. So maybe one every 2 years. But I think it allows me to delve into different styles, because this genre that I'm in, it's not really about a particular style of music. I could sing a very bluesy kind of melody, or very country or folk, or very traditional arabesque kind of melody. But so it really gives me that freedom. But obviously, without the musical instruments, we have to be a lot more creative.
Are you still getting flack from the scholars that you were alluding to for using drums and percussion instruments?
Well, I think, not as much as I expected, because I always do push the boundaries as much as I can. But I think a lot of the scholars see the overall benefit, that if I do a song, like I did a song recently with my son called Drug Free, which is it's a very popular anti-drug song. And if yes, we have drums, it's a very modern melody that's got some hip-hop elements, which my son does. And but when you look at the benefit for a young person listening to that song, and hopefully making that person think about, for example, the negative effects of drug abuse. So I think the scholars look at the benefits, and they realize that the benefits heavily outweigh any possible doubts that they have. And I think that, the support I've got is really quite tremendous.
Would you say that, and perhaps going to back some of the rhetoric that you mentioned now, that the scholars are looking at the negatives and the positive, and the positives override the negative, do you think that it's also ignorant to think that a young Muslim is not listening to westernized music such as hip-hop and rock music? Do you think?
Totally. I think it's very naive if we have this. The youth all over the world are listening to mainstream music, and unfortunately a lot of mainstream music has a lot of negative connotations to it, and because of this, it's really up to us to try to provide some alternatives to what they're listening to, with a strong message which will allow them towards making the right decisions. And that's really what it's all about. So using the same medium, like we have television, we have the internet, we have music, it can be used in the wrong way, but I think it's up to us to try to provide a responsible alternative that will hopefully provide some hope for the youth.
Are you going to push boundaries even further? Can we expect some guitar work going forward?
Maybe not necessarily on guitar work, but I think definitely in terms of genres, in terms of content. For example, on this latest album, Hope, I released a song called The Woman I Love. Yeah. And it's not necessarily maybe sounding like a traditional spiritual song, but it's appreciating for a man the women in his life. You have your mother, you have your wife, you have your daughter, you have your, women play such a pivotal role in society. And if you look at countries that are experiencing poverty or war, the two biggest parts of our community that get marginalized the most are women and children. So I think celebrating women, is very important. That's why I wrote that song. And I wrote many, many songs. I've got another song, as I mentioned earlier, called My Mom is Amazing, which celebrates mothers and the role they have in all our lives. So I think pushing boundaries in that respect, talking about subject matter that possibly is important to be said, not maybe popularized or commercial, but need to be spoken about. I think in that respect, without a doubt, I'll always be pushing the boundaries.
Fantastic. We're going to take a very short break. When we come back, we'll hear more from Zain Bhikha.
To Allah belong the jinn, the angels, and all men. From purify your purest life and colored sins. To Allah belong.
Welcome back to On the Couch. Still with me is Zain Bhikha. So Zain, I'd like to perhaps take a step back and look at the overall scenario that is playing out in the world. We know that there is a lot of tension between Islam and Muslims, obviously, and the West. And we know that it's something that is ongoing and perhaps very disheartening as well. What is your sense about some of the tensions that are going on?
Well, I think ever since 9/11 took place, the atrocities took place in the States, I think it's really brought to light the lack of communication from the Muslim world to the non-Muslim world or people of other faiths about what Islam really stands for. And I'm not a scholar and I'm not a sort of a politician or I'm involved in that space, but just as an ordinary Muslim person, it often feels that the faith is hijacked by, radical minority who portray the complete, incorrect picture of what Islam is really about. And for me, as an artist, I always felt it's a great responsibility to use my voice in the smallest of ways to really portray the right message. And I've done that in the course of many songs. For example, last year, we released, during the Soccer World Cup in South Africa, we released a song called First We Need the Love. And really it was about, telling the communities of the world that, religious groups are being polarized and we're forced to almost hate each other because of our religion. And really this is not what life should be about. We should be celebrating our diversity, but also celebrating the things that we have in common. And every decent human being in the world wants to live together in peace and harmony with people of all faiths. And I think that's really, I would like to think about my role as a Islamic musician, if I can call myself that, to try to add my voice to that. So the song First We Need the Love is really about telling people that love is really the underlying emotion. It's very easy to hate. It's very easy to feel, hatred or intolerance towards somebody else. But love is really the greatest emotion that we as human beings need to reach out to neighbors and brothers and sisters and people who we don't know, that irrespective of the faith that they follow, and say that let's try to live together in this world and try to make this world better. There are so many problems that are happening beyond that, whether you look at poverty, you look at the huge separation between rich and poor, even in this country, that we should go beyond those, the political and religious differences, rather try to focus on changing the world around us. This particular album, I've also done a remix of a very popular song, Michael Jackson's Heal the World. Throughout my musical career, people have often compared our voices. To be honest, I don't really know why. I think he was one of the greatest songwriters and singers that ever lived. And I don't think my talent can actually compare to his. But I felt to pay tribute to a great artist and a beautiful song, I did a cover version of Heal the World. And we shot the video in Soweto. And I think it allowed me to hopefully bring an African sense to this wonderful universal song and give it my own style, without music obviously, with a lot of drums and voices. And again, so coming back to your question, using my voice and the audience that I have to try to change perspectives. If people see a music video done by me, they say, well, this is a Muslim guy who's singing about something that's bringing people together, and hopefully that will give them a better understanding that Muslims are following a religion of peace, and terrorism and the killing of innocent people has no place in our faith. Absolutely. And I think that's important responsibility on me.
And of course, in all religions, I would
Absolutely.
assume globally,
Absolutely.
the killing of innocent people is not allowed. But we know behind every war, there's usually land that is at play, or there's religion. Do you think that the issues on a global level are escalating, or would you say that they are starting to find some form of direction, and hopefully the direction is towards peace? Because sometimes I look at the world and I go, well, if there's so many problems as you were alluding to, how do we find the right path? And then media comes into play, where perhaps depicting Islam as an aggressive culture, and then also similarly to what the views are on westernized thoughts. So as you mentioned, the polarization is occurring on a day-to-day basis. Is it getting better, or is it getting worse?
Sure, that's a very, very difficult question. I think it depends. Some days I'm very positive when I look at the news and I look at things changing, and I believe that things are getting better. But sometimes you just look at the huge amounts of challenges that we as human beings face throughout the world, and so much poverty and so much killing. I feel that it's far from us. But I think how I tend to internalize it is, most importantly, what's in my control, and what can I do to change the conditions of my community, my family, my country, and what is in my control. And really, if each of us can do that, just try to use whatever we have available to us in whatever mediums, big and small. I think if we all start making a difference, I think things will get better. They have to.
I hope so. What can we expect from Zain Bhikha going forward? We know you're back in the country, I think since last year, essentially. What can we expect from you going forward? Obviously, more albums. Anything that you've got in store for us that you'd like to reveal?
Well, one thing I think, I've got a lot of albums. I've got 7 albums now. I would like to tour a lot more on those albums, specifically in Africa. I would love to do more in Africa. And I think this coming year, I'll try to make it a specific focus of mine. I also do a lot of youth workshops, which allows me to travel to schools and speak to specifically teenagers. It's a lot of motivation, as well as creative expression, giving them some of the tools that I've learned of how to express yourself. I would love to do a lot more workshops, and possibly just do more albums in the coming years. I think this next year I'll probably want to focus on the tours and the workshops for now. But I'm very blessed for all the opportunities I've had thus far, and I just hope to do a lot more.
Fantastic, Zain. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Really
for having me on the show.
appreciate it. That was Zain Bhikha joining us for this edition of On the Couch. From me, Eleni Jakos. We'll see you next time.
There are people dying. If you care enough for the living, make a better place for you and for me. You and for me. Heal the world we live in. Save it for our children. Heal the world we live in. Save it for our children.